My name is Holly Kammier. I am the co-founder and co-owner of Acorn Publishing, and I am also an author, and I'm joining you here in the written scene.
Hello and welcome to The Written Scene. My name is Adam Greenfield. I am the host, and today is, if you like round numbers, today is episode 50. And while that number sounds and looks cool, we're still not at 2 years. We got a couple more episodes before that. Looking forward to who I figure out that guest will be, but we will find out at some point. However, today's guest is someone that I have known about her publishing house, Acorn, for several years at least. We've had at least one Acorn Publishing alumni on the show, Leslie Ferguson. But today we are going to talk to the co-founder of the whole shebang. So, Holly, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I have known about Acorn Publishing for a while, but what I really want to start and talk about first is the slogan, redefining what it means to be published. So when you hear that, what goes through your mind when you hear that?
Control.
Ooh. Yeah. Why control?
Because we're in a time right now, it's probably the most difficult time in history to get a publishing deal with the big five, the big four. And
why is that? Is it just a lot of people writing, or has it just gotten more difficult in the acceptance process?
The industry itself is shrinking.
I see. Okay.
But it's harder for writers, I would say most specifically, because these houses are taking less and less risk on writers, and they're looking for people with platforms. So they have whole departments that are reaching out to influencers, to celebrities, and they will provide a ghostwriter. They will encourage what the topic should be about. You know, memoirs are focused on specific things. So it reduces the opportunity for people who have dedicated their lives to the actual craft of writing. There's not as much room for us.
The first time published authors.
Correct.
You mean, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we could spend years and years and years trying to find a good agent. That agent could spend years trying to get it placed. So control begins right from the beginning. If you have a quality manuscript and you reach out to a hybrid, the process is sped up.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you and I'm not trying to put you on the spot at all, because this is not what this podcast is about. But you said a quality manuscript. What would you say is a quality manuscript?
Ooh, that's so hard to define.
Okay.
A good story, a good topic, good writing.
Yeah. Right. I always feel like a good story can be ruined with bad writing.
Yes. And sometimes good writing
Can be ruined.
can ruin a good story.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes. We have to be careful about that.
Yeah.
Books that sell well, the story seems to be the more critical component.
Okay.
People read for story, and if they're getting quality writing along with it, all the better.
Well, you do fiction and nonfiction at Acorn, right?
Correct.
What makes a good nonfiction story? Because I think in fiction and I think in poetry. So I can make stuff up and find a good story. But in nonfiction, it seems like there's not that there's not room for creativity, but it seems like the story is already there. You're just making it pretty. Do I have that wrong?
No. And nonfiction is its own animal. So
Yeah.
you're right. What I'm talking about is definitely more focused on fiction.
Okay.
With nonfiction is, what are you teaching them?
Gotcha.
What are they going to walk away with that's relevant to their lives?
How do they become? How do they grow after reading it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. What am I
okay.
getting out of this? I mean, we purchase nonfiction to learn and grow.
Yeah, and memoir. Even for me, when I read memoir, I am looking. I don't know how to say it. When I read it, I am trying to connect, and I think that's from my poetry days. Because whenever I read poetry, I'm always trying to connect somehow, and I think most people do when they read poetry.
Mm-hmm.
With memoir, I found it to be a little more challenging because it's not my life; it's somebody else's.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to sort of try to connect, but also not try too hard, to take something meaningful away from that story. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yes. And I think memoir, there's almost two different categories of memoir. There's celebrity memoir,
Mm-hmm.
where you're reading it to learn very specifically about that person's life,
Right.
because you're interested in them. Britney Spears' memoir just came out. You're reading it to find out what is it like to be her and what juicy gossip does she have to spill.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas if you're reading a writer's memoir, I think you're looking for all sorts of bits of wisdom. And I think that the writing becomes extremely important. The quality of the writing, the beauty of it is very important in memoir. Whereas if you're writing a thriller, if you're writing YA fantasy, that's more story driven. It's more plot driven. Memoir, I think most of us are coming to it, if we're not reading a celebrity memoir, for the beauty of the writing.
Yeah. No, that's actually a really good point. I think of when I read Leslie's memoir, which you all should read, because When I Was Her Daughter was just a beautiful book, but it was written beautifully as well.
Yes.
And I know that she's also a poet, so there's a little bit of creativity with her language and the way she got points across.
Yes.
So I can see what you're saying. I really do appreciate that. Was there something personal about your own publishing experiences that sort of pushed you or inspired you to start your own publishing company?
The way we started Acorn was extremely organic. We did not go into it with
really quick,
a plan.
You say we. Who was? I just want to make sure we throw the other name out there.
Jessica Tarian
Okay.
is my co-founder, best friend, partner in crime.
Cool. Okay.
We started Acorn together. I had a small content editing business. Jessica was a runaway success with a trilogy that she had published, a YA trilogy. Came in number 3 behind Hunger Games when it was released. It was a big deal.
That's pretty cool.
And the publishing house that she was with didn't do such a great job of releasing her second book. And she had an attorney. She got the rights back to her work, and she wanted to self-publish to have complete control. She had learned so much through her experience. She felt confident she could do it herself and do it better.
Yeah.
Which turns out is pretty darn rare, because we have learned a whole lot over the last 8 years.
I bet.
That was her feeling. And she came to me and said, hey, 8 years ago, self-publishing was really frowned upon. And so she didn't want to appear self-published. And she asked me, can you add on to your company a fake publishing label, and I can publish under this fake imprint?
Right.
So that I appear more legit. And I said, oh, sure. Why not? I went to my graphic designer. We came up with the Acorn logo. We became Acorn Author Services and Publishing for a very short period of time. I was finishing up my second book. The first one was a memoir, which I got interest in, but the publishing industry kept wanting it changed. The powers that be kept saying, well, this is great, but can you make it this way? Can you change this? Can you change that? And I kept changing things, and years were going by.
And it was no longer probably the story you initially wanted to tell.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
And it didn't even feel true to me. And I set it aside, and just as kind of a creative exercise for myself, I thought, for me, writing my memoir was pretty easy. I'm a former journalist. I was writing a true story. It flowed out quite easily. And so I had challenged myself after that memoir to write a fiction book.
Okay.
So I had this manuscript. And Jessica had come to me and she was getting ready to go on this journey of self-publishing under my fake imprint. And I thought, why don't we do this together rather than me spending who knows how amount of time trying to get an agent, which I may or may not ever get. And then if I got that agent, them trying to get me a publishing deal, and years and years and years going by with potentially nothing happening at the end of those years.
Mm-hmm.
So I self-published my book with her, taking notes on everything. I mean, she was much more technically savvy than me. She's quite a bit younger than I am, different generation.
Yeah.
So she was doing the things and I was writing everything down. You know, by the time we were done and ready to publish, I had basically compiled a book on how to self-publish for dummies.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I combined my journalism experience, and I had done publicity for other authors in the past. I had gotten one of my authors onto Oprah. So I brought my own skill set, and our books did well. They both hit in pretty decent categories on Barnes and Noble. You know, they were selling.
They were selling. They're moving. Yeah.
They were doing well. And so it became that kind of almost obvious aha moment. What if we did this for real? So we practiced on one of my favorite clients who I had content edited her book, Alyssa Pettersell's Somehow I Am Different. And she'd been out shopping it and nothing was happening, which is so common.
Yeah, that's my fear.
Yes, it's a very valid fear because these rejections are not necessarily based on the quality of your work. In fact, they usually aren't.
Right.
If you're a good writer.
If you're good, yeah.
It's what's your platform? Who's guaranteed to buy your book? Why are you a safe bet?
How many TikTok followers do you have?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I reached out to Alyssa and said, hey, would you like to publish under our fake imprint? We will run everything for you at no charge. And it's our way of seeing if we can replicate what we did for ourselves for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And she said yes.
Oh, cool.
And her book did really well.
Did it? Okay.
Yes. She was named one of Kirkus Review's Indie Books of the Year.
Wow. And that's probably a hard thing to get from them.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a really big deal. The New York Book Festival, she was the Indie Book of the Year with them.
Wow. Okay. So you were able to replicate that success. And
yes.
Okay. That was probably an even bigger aha moment.
It was exciting.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we can do this. We had very young children 8 years ago, and we started off really small. This was something we did while we were raising our kids. So we could work from home, flexible hours. And it's really only in the last 2 years that we've opened it up to a lot more people.
How many authors do you guys have now?
We have, at my last count, about 80. So I'm maybe 90 now. I need to go through and count.
Yeah.
Well over 150 books published. Most of them have won awards. They've hit in best-selling categories. They're going on to teach writing courses and participate in festivals. Before we started the podcast, we were talking about Dennis Crosby, who's one of our authors, who had been struggling for years trying to get his work out there. He signed with us, and now he's on panels at Comic-Con each year, teaching classes at the Southern California Writers Conference. His book is at the airport here in San Diego. We get all of our authors the opportunity to do book signings at Barnes & Noble. So we're living the dream.
Yeah.
And we're not waiting 10 years and spending our time being rejected. We're actually putting our work out there and getting it read and being part of the community.
That's the probably a big first step. Maybe not a first step, but a big step along the way is getting out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I have found is while this is possibly the worst time in history to get those big publishing deals, it is the best time in history to get streaming deals.
Oh, yeah.
So you get your work out there, you take back that control of the time frame, and also you have a lot more say when you publish with a hybrid.
Well, but I want to ask this. I didn't actually write this question down, but I was just thinking this. When you say the word hybrid, well, what is a hybrid publisher for people that may not know?
Great question. Hybrid means you're combining elements of the indie publishing world with the traditional.
Okay.
And each hybrid is going to look a little different because what pieces they mix and match is individual to the company.
Okay.
But hybrid is the idea, and when it's done well, of getting the best of both worlds. More control, tighter time frame, but also still having that same quality that you would get.
Is that through like editing and even the jacket art or
that's
all of the
huge.
stuff?
Right.
Yeah.
Editing, formatting, proofing, cover design is huge. I think I read last night online there was a study done or a survey done asking readers how important the cover was a factor in purchasing a book. And don't quote me on this, but I want to say it was like 79% or higher said that was one of the number one factors in purchasing a book. It just you cannot underestimate the importance of cover design.
And I know that there's the saying, don't judge a book by its cover. However, I think in some ways it's okay. I don't want to use the word okay, but it's possible to do that and get away with it and know you did fine. You know, like, because I know when I'm sitting at Comic-Con and people walk up, they usually stop as they're walking past and they look at all the covers of the books.
Mm-hmm.
And they walk over to the one with the cover that drew them in and they pick up that book.
Yes.
And that is, to me, a non-monetary sell. You know, so somebody all of a sudden, they have a book in their hands. Now, they've got to open it up and hope the inside, the content, is worth the cover. So I think a lot of books do sell by the cover. And that makes sense.
Absolutely. And we live in a social media world
A very
now.
visual world.
So your cover matters to the TikTok influencers, Instagram, Pinterest. A big portion of the books that they're choosing, they have to look good.
Well, I know Leslie, when she was going through hers, she was trying to find the right one, and then she had this picture of her and her mom, and, you know, there's the crack in it, you know, and it's just like, oh, now that is a perfect even description of the book.
Yes.
You know, so I wouldn't be able to pick out a cover for my book. I don't have that visual sense.
Most authors that I have found over the years are too close to the story to influence a cover design that is going to sell books.
Right.
And the number one thing we see, which might be surprising, is that the writer wants very specific scenes and important themes in the story on the cover. And I'm not talking about just one, but like, okay, I have these 4 or 5 things that have to be on a cover. And if you follow that thought process, you're going to have a book that looks self-published.
And messy.
Yeah. The cover is not about reflecting important scenes in your book. The cover is to sell the book.
Right. And I've tried my hand at designing a book that I would like to get published at someday, and it's very clean. Like, it's just the title, which is Stealing Ferlinghetti, and it's in that newspaper font, you know, and then it's just black and white and the lines, and it's white background, black letters, like simple, because the rest of the book is micro poems.
Oh, wow.
You know, so it's very simple and clean, and I love that aspect. I like a good cover, but I also like something clean if the rest of the book is going to be that way.
Yes.
You know? So I've tried my hand at it, and I like the idea of it, but I also have to be open to the idea of someone who's in a better position to know what does sell based on the cover to say, maybe not. Let's think of another way to do it.
Right.
You know, because I know my focus is the words. You guys focus on the images. You know, so I'm it's cool that these hybrid publishing houses exist. I remember thinking about publishing my own, doing self-publishing a decade or so ago, and I was like, I don't want to do that. But now I think it's changing and getting better.
Yes, it's better. The good ones have lasted.
Yeah.
And we've gotten better. I mean, in 8 years' time, we're learning.
Well, you're growing. You're almost 100 authors.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
So I want to go back.
Okay.
Way back. I want to find out, when you were a kid, were books a big part of growing up? Were you into reading?
Huge.
Yeah. What were you reading?
My dad was an English teacher.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So I was reading books that I was probably too young to understand
Me
completely.
too. I get it. I get it.
Steinbeck. I mean, my first memories of books, aside from The Little Engine That Could.
Berenstain Bears.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those absolute delicious classics.
Right. Yeah.
My first memories of real books, Steinbeck and Judy Blume. Judy Blume was targeted for my age range, but Steinbeck, I mean, I'm reading The Pearl and The Little Pony, and I'm definitely not absorbing the deeper meaning.
Right.
Oh, before I was 10.
Then?
Oh, well, yes.
I read Clan of the Cave Bear by Jane Auel at 7, 8 years old. No idea what I was reading, but I was like, I just want to take in all the words. I'll figure it out later.
And for me, it was my dad gave me this, and he told me it was important, and it felt special to me.
Yeah.
But
were there ever things that you think, looking back, that he wouldn't have let you read?
What a good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad was very Catholic.
Okay. So there might have been a few things here.
So there probably were things that he was uncomfortable with. I grew up in a very interesting family. My parents were hippies.
Okay.
So my dad was very Catholic. My mother was agnostic Jew. And
that's me, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Super, super liberal. So yeah, before I was 10, and I know it was before I was 10 because we moved a lot. So I can always remember, where was I living when I was reading these books. So my dad was giving me Steinbeck. My mother was giving me books on, how to not get pregnant when I was 7 years old, and was so embarrassed that she was giving me these books on what my private parts look like, what was going to happen when my breasts started to bud.
Equally important, but could have waited a few years probably.
So when you ask, are there things that my dad wouldn't have maybe wanted me to read? He probably would have felt uncomfortable with the books that my mother was giving me.
Funny. That's funny. But you read them anyway.
I did in private.
Okay.
I did not want to read the books my mom gave me in public. My dad's books were public. My mom's were private.
Yeah, one's at school, one's at home.
Yes, in the closet.
Yeah, with a little flashlight.
And then she would ask me, "Did you read it?" And I would say no.
But I still know everything about.
Right, but I'm not going to discuss it with you.
I'm not there yet. Did you have a lot of friends reading? Any siblings that were into it? Or were you even writing? When did you start writing stuff too?
My first memory of writing was the 3rd grade.
Okay.
And we had an assignment. We were going to spend, I don't know how many months, working on our own diaries to be like Laura Ingalls' Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And I remember, we got the paper and you had to crinkle it up as much as you could to make it look old. And the cover was made out of the paper grocery store bags.
Yeah.
And we would cut that and crinkle it as much as we could and get it dirty, and then burned the edges. I mean, just the process of creating the book that we were then going to write in was one of the most exciting memories I have in my childhood.
That's pretty cool.
Yes.
I love that thought of that. I remember, and this is slightly different, actually very different, but similar in a way. I remember I missed a writing assignment in school. I must have been in 8th grade, 7th grade. And I just threw out there, my dog ate it, just to be funny. And I didn't have a dog. And he was like, well, do you have any left of it? And I was like, yeah, a little bit. And he's like, I'd like to see that tomorrow. So I went home, I took paper and I got it all dirty and took a bite out of it, and I turned it in. He's like, well, I know this was fake, but I'll give you credit for it anyway, because you went out of the way through that process of following through.
Yes, you were trying.
I was trying, yeah. But just the idea of making a book like that just sounds like a lot of fun. And you were doing that in 3rd grade?
3rd grade. I still remember. I wish I had that. I'm an anti-hoarder. I have an
Right.
issue. My children are very resentful. I throw everything away. I don't save
Fair.
anything. I
Yeah.
need to be ready to leave with a backpack at any moment.
Yeah, sounds like my girlfriend. She's very
Um,
much that way.
Yeah.
She's on ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's its own sickness.
It happens.
So I wish I had that, but I remember it like it was yesterday, and we did the hole punching.
Yeah.
The paper already had the 3 holes,
Mm-hmm.
but the paper bag that we had
That
created
needed
for the
that.
cover needed the hole punchings, and then we had twine string
Yeah.
that we would tie each of the 3
That's so
circles
cool.
together with, and then when we started the actual writing and with the dates, and I got so lost in it.
Do you remember the title of your book?
No,
No.
no, that
Do you
I
still
don't
have
remember.
it? I guess not. If you're.
No, I don't save anything.
That's right. Yeah, you don't.
I'm lucky I have my diploma.
Yeah. I have a story I wrote when I was much younger. It was one of the first ones I wrote. I might have been 10, 12 years old, and I've mentioned it here on the podcast, and I still have it. And I don't know why, but at the same time, I look at it and I'm like, this has been a part of my life the entire time. Like, writing has just been who I am for as long as I can remember. And I'm glad I held on to it. I have all these books up here, and believe me, I've gotten rid of a lot of books. These used to be, this bookshelf here is, what is it, a 20 cubby bookshelf from IKEA. Every one of them was filled with books.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had to remove, 3/4 of the books I had, and that was very hard. But now I'm a 1 book in, 1 book out person. If I get a new book, one of them has to go.
That's very disciplined of you.
It's very hard. I don't like it, but I have to do it, or else I will go get out of control with it.
I feel like I don't have that rule, but I end up doing that because I'm down to 1 small bookshelf, and most of the shelves are filled with Acorn Publishing books.
Okay, all right.
Although
Do you do that on purpose to prevent yourself from buying new books?
no, there's just not room.
There's just not room. Okay, all right.
And then I have two of the shelves for my favorites.
Yeah.
And the favorites have to have a very specific meaning attached to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What did this right?
Yeah.
What did this inspire in my life? Significant.
The minimalists. I know a lot of people go with what is her name?
Sparks of Joy.
Yeah. All of a sudden her name left my head. But the minimalists, these 2 guys.
Kondo.
Marie Kondo. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm glad we got to that much
Yes.
quicker than I thought. At 3 a.m, I'll wake up. Marie Kondo. My girlfriend would be like, "What? Huh?" But there was these 2 guys, the minimalists, and
Oh, I know.
You know them? Okay.
They have like a Netflix
They do.
documentary. It's
Yeah.
fabulous.
it really is good. They talked about holding on to things that provide value to your life, and it can be anything.
Mm-hmm.
But just try to make sure that it has value. So all the books that I do keep, in one way or another, mean something to me.
Yes, I love those 2 guys, and
Yeah.
I try to live that life.
It's hard.
Well, it's not if you have a sickness to get rid of
Right.
things.
There is that. Okay, let's say it's hard for healthy people.
Yes.
Let's put it that way.
Yes.
All right.
My father was a hoarder, by the way. So,
okay.
and my job growing up was to go to his house after my parents were divorced and throw away things for him while he yelled at me.
Nice.
Not that, Holly.
Not that.
Why?
Why
Why
that?
that?
Oh, I I had that same voice in my head when I was getting rid of the books. Because, as I told you, I moved basically, a quarter of a block away, and I brought with me 12 boxes of books,
Mm-hmm.
and I got rid of 9. And I remember the entire time I was just like, I'm crying. I'm like, no, I like this book too, but it can't stay, because I set out all the ones I set off the ones to the side that I was never getting rid of.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the rest. And I still had room, but I had limited room. So I had to go through and with those pick out the ones I wanted the most. And that was impossible.
I could have helped you.
I'm sure you could have. The sick people always can. But
I get a dopamine hit from getting rid of things.
Well, I took it up to there's a house up the street that has it's a cool little free library outside, and I dropped off 9 boxes of books, and I got an email like the next day, and they were like, "Are you sure? There's some good books in here." I'm like, "Don't ask me, because I will come back and take them back. I was like, I can't do it. If I out of sight, out of mind kind of a thing, you know?
Yes.
It's
amazing how much less we can live with.
Yeah, it's hard though. There's a lot of things I can live without. Books, books are meant to be read. They shouldn't be trophies on a bookshelf. So I've tried to live by that, but for someone that loves books so much, it is very difficult to not have a ton of books.
So let me ask you a question.
All right.
What are your feelings about dog ears, writing in your books?
Let's see. I used to dog ear all the time. And I never wrote. The only time I wrote in the margins or underlined things or highlighted things was in school.
Mm-hmm.
But I have learned since then that if I'm going to be giving books away, I shouldn't be writing my own notes in them.
Mm-hmm.
So because I don't want to do that to the next reader. Because then all of a sudden they think, oh, maybe I should focus on this. This other person did, so I should focus on that.
Yes.
And I don't want to do that to them. I want their reading experience and comprehension experience and all of that to be pure in a way. So I now use bookmarks for everything.
That is very kind and thoughtful.
Well, thank you. I try. But I try to keep books as clean as possible. And I'll even, if I get a hardback, I will take the cover off of it, put it aside so I don't ruin the cover, and read the book, and then put the cover back on when I'm done.
I do that, but not for as altruistic reasons.
No.
It just bothers me because they always are, the flap's always coming off.
Yeah, you can't tape them down like the libraries,
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love the library ones where they're taped down.
Right. They got
that
that
is the
plastic
most
on
special
cover on it.
feeling when you're reading a hardcover library book with the laminate.
It really is. That's kind of nice. I kind of want to do that with all my hardcover books, but no. And the other problem I have is, listeners can't see this, but you can. In the afternoon, I get all the sunlight beating down on my books, and I've noticed that the colors are fading on a lot of these books. So
patina.
Oh, the character is what you're saying. It's giving them life.
It makes
Got
it better.
It's a visual life.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I'm. But here's the thing: I want to see a bookshelf like this with my books on it.
Yes.
Like that would be pretty cool. Those I wouldn't mind getting rid of. That would be easier to get rid of, I think.
I use them as decoration too. I have many books now.
Yeah.
And so in my little living room area, I have them stacked on a special table.
Oh, fun.
And that's part of my
like a book
minimalist
stack.
decoration are my books. There is no better feeling than that.
Well, I do have a print of my first book framed like this, and hanging up in the room, in my bedroom. So believe me, it used to be out here. So I understand what you're saying. Like, I get it. I want that artistic vision out there too. So if you started writing early, started reading early, I assume you followed that thread through college. You went to UCLA?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you followed that through all the way.
I was a political science major, which is nothing but papers.
Mm.
So
my brother's a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
He said in the first year, they scare you to death. The second year, they work you to death. And the third year, they bore you to death. And it's all writing the entire time.
Yeah, I didn't make it. I was going to go to law school.
Thinking about it,
and
yeah.
I fortunately followed my real dream, which was to be a journalist. At the last moment,
Okay.
I thought, well, I can go do what I should do.
Yeah.
Or I could do what I really want to do.
Mm.
And sometimes I still question if I made the right decision.
Well, it seemed to have turned out. It took you on a path, I think, that...
The artist path is a harder path.
It is. Let me ask you this then. Let me follow up on that. Is it worth it?
For me, it's worth it because I don't think, even though I say I question myself, I know in my core that I couldn't have led that other life.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky enough to help out. My mother was a director at a pharmaceutical company, and I spent a summer working for her and thought I was going to shrivel up and die being in a cubicle. And my stepdad is still a CPA, and I worked for him a handful of hours, and again, felt like I was going to shrivel up and die.
Yeah.
So I know that I had to do this. I did not have a choice. I always tell my kids, try and do something practical.
Yeah.
You know, they both are going to go to school and want to be doctors. Thank God.
Don't do something creative.
Yes. Don't do something creative unless you have to.
Unless you have to. So now, I know you say this, but what percentage of seriousness are you? Because I'm sure as an artist or creator yourself, there's a part of you that doesn't want, if that is their path, as hard as it may be, you don't want to stifle that, right?
No. And they both, you know, my younger daughter is a writer.
Mm-hmm.
She's written books and she's always working on projects. And if she ended up not going to med school, that would be okay.
Okay.
Of course. Yeah. I didn't.
Right.
My mother wanted me to be a dentist.
Right.
And I'm not.
Right.
But I feel like it's my duty to try and move them in the direction of financial stability. And then if their heart feels so strong about going into the arts, then they won't have to question it as much maybe as I do, even though I know. Because
they took the chance and did the other things, the other more practical, less creative stuff to find out.
Yes.
My brother's a lawyer, and as I just said, he went to law school, so of course he's a lawyer, and he is surprisingly, even in a small way, creative. But he's very logical thinking. Even as a kid, he was my lawyer and got me out of trouble. And I was always in trouble. And my mother, and I know she hates saying this, but she taught me the baby boomer way of thinking, which is you work, you save, you retire, you enjoy life.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried that. I spent 20 years, 15, in cubicle work, corporate whore, basically. Did all the things.
Mm-hmm.
Started, saving money, looking at retirement stuff, and I just hated life the entire time. And I knew I wasn't doing what I should be doing. And in 2016, I quit all of that. And I was like, I'm going to do something creative. And I started a podcasting business on my own. And within 6 months, blew through my savings and failed miserably. I went back, got a different job that wasn't in an office, but still wasn't what I wanted to do, and I'm kind of still there. I've been there for a while, but that's okay because I'm noticing now that I have to work there less. Now I'm only there 3 days a week, part-time. The other times I'm doing my writing, and I'm doing podcasting work. Much of my income is through podcasting work now.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
It's a massive accomplishment.
It's very difficult, and I went through a lot of heartache to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But as much as I sometimes wish I did that stuff sooner, I'm glad I didn't, because I don't think I would have as much appreciation for what I do now as I do now.
Your path was the right path for you.
It had to be. I guess it could. I could have made it a little prettier along the way, But we go through things to learn, I think, and
definitely.
I think that's the best lesson learned, as hard as a reality as that may be. I want to ask about publishing experiences, and that's journalistic, memoir, fiction, whatever it may be. Does each one have its own feel, a distinct feel, and if so, how?
Each genre?
Each publishing within that genre, yeah. So if you had journalistic stories published versus your memoir or fiction, do they have a different feeling, or is it, I've been published?
So you're saying, does the author feel different at the end of each experience?
Yeah, like is it a different, like, okay, I've got my newspaper article, whatever, journalistic, magazine article, that's been published, and then you move on to the next story. But is that feeling of being published, because I'm basically trying to get to the feeling of being published, like with the writer themselves and how that feels to them. And because when I published poetry, when I had my book of poetry published, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. But I think it's going to feel different when I have a novel published and I have my collection of short stories published. I just think there's going to be something different in that experience.
I can't speak for my authors because I don't. I haven't asked them that question.
For you
it's
personally?
Such a question, but for me personally, yes.
Okay.
And I've never thought about that. But okay, so I was a journalist for years and I was on television every night. And that was exciting in its own right, but it never felt like I was a writer. Even though
Mm.
I wrote those stories, it
Yeah.
very much felt like I was an editor putting it together. I was the face standing there presenting it. When people would call in or write about stories that I had done, they were
Mm-hmm.
commenting on my eyebrows
Right.
or my outfit.
No valid, really needed critique.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the eyebrow thing is real. Lipstick
That's
shade.
so bananas.
So even though for me the writing was the most important thing, I never felt validated as a writer.
As a writer, okay.
Doing that for years. When I published my first book, that was probably one of the best feelings in the world. And then most recently, Jessica and I released an anthology together.
Oh, cool.
And that didn't feel nearly as satisfying as a writer. It felt satisfying in that we were putting other people's stories together,
Mm-hmm.
and we were it was an anthology of letters written by women all across the world about their experience with COVID.
Oh, wow.
So it was extremely meaningful in that I felt like we were preserving history.
Mm-hmm.
My
Mm-hmm.
dad was not only an English teacher, he was also a history teacher,
Okay.
and he's no longer alive.
Sorry to
And
hear that.
so I felt like I was honoring him and that he would be so proud
Yeah.
that I had anthologized a moment in history that will be taught for as long as humanity exists. But the feeling of being a writer wasn't there. So yes, there were different feelings. This was, oh, I'm proud that I have preserved this for others in the
Mm-hmm.
future,
Mm-hmm.
and for all the women and little girls whose works were included in this anthology.
Yeah.
But publishing a novel felt like I was a real proper writer.
Yeah. Is it different or is it better that you published your novel versus publishing other people's work or the journalistic stuff? Is it just different?
They're all so different.
Yeah, it's hard to say one's better than the other.
Yes, I feel so proud to be a publisher that
Yeah.
I have put books into the world that wouldn't have existed
Right.
otherwise. To
Right.
have people telling me that I made their dream come true, that feels like purpose, you know?
Well, that was actually my follow-up question. You know, when you publish a first-time author, I mean, do you get emotional along with them? I'm sure
Very
they're
much
emotional.
so.
Yeah.
Very much so.
You know that feeling.
Yes, I know what they're feeling because I've been through
Been there,
it.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of living vicariously through them in that moment. And again, it's that feeling of purpose that I am doing my part
Yeah.
to make the world a little bit better place.
Right.
You know, we don't just publish anything. We vet the work,
Yeah.
and there are certain things, regardless of how good the quality of the writing and story may be, that I wouldn't publish because I don't think it makes the world a better place.
What's your favorite kind of story to read?
Personally, I have such a soft spot for memoir.
Memoir. Okay. Why is that? Is it the vulnerability or is it?
It's the vulnerability, it's the beautiful writing, and it is my eternal fascination with human beings.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's what drew me into journalism. My job was to go out in the world every day and to walk up to strangers and ask them whatever questions I wanted.
Yeah. Is it like being a fly on the wall, kind of?
It's better than being a fly.
It's being in their brain.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Nothing is more fascinating to me than humans.
As a publisher, what do you think is the best story for someone to read as a publisher of your own, of other authors? Like, what draws you to other stories as a publisher?
What draws me to
a story as a publisher, even an editor, I guess? Like, what really goes, okay, this is something that we can actually work with?
Well, I defer. So science fiction is not my genre.
Okay.
I have a real appreciation for it,
Yeah.
but it is not my genre. So I wouldn't make that decision.
Right. Right.
The books that I'm deciding on are the books that I love and recognize this is good.
So it's not just a specific kind of story. It's just the how it impacts you.
Yes.
Okay. And you
Yes.
and I assume you want to pass that impact on to the reader as well.
Absolutely.
And that's why you're okay.
Yes. And I know usually within half a page. I teach at a lot of writers' conferences,
Mm-hmm.
and I hear over and over and over again from new writers when you start to read their work, oh, well, you just have to keep going. Wait till you get to chapter 3. And I tell them, no publisher is ever going to get to chapter 3. And
Right.
honestly, no reader is either. I mean, you can say, oh, it's the publisher's fault or the agent's fault, because if they had just kept reading, they would have got sucked in. But they're vetting on behalf of readers, and readers aren't going to do that either. It is so important to realize you really only have that
first page. Yeah.
to pull them in or not.
Sometimes it's just the first line.
Yes.
You know, like
Yes.
there's an old, I don't know if this is entirely true, but years and years ago, I used to work as a rep for a record label.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember hearing that when people would send a cassette tape of a new band, they would send a cassette tape to a label. The person listening only listened to the first 30 seconds of the first 3 songs and made their decision from there. So if your song doesn't hit them, or it finally is supposed to hit them at 45 seconds or a minute in, they're not going to get there. They're not going to hear it. You're not going to be on their label.
And it's completely fair, because think about when you're sitting in your car and a song comes on the radio. Most people's attention spans are very short. They're not
Mhm.
going to listen to half the song to
Right.
decide if they like it.
It's got to grab them.
It's either going to grab them or they're going to hit the button.
Unless they're already a fan of yours.
Correct.
And as a first-time writer or published writer, that's you may have a following, but it's probably not quite there yet
Yes.
at that point.
Right.
So
Right.
it's definitely some humble pie.
Yes. Once
Yeah.
you've completely established yourself, people are going to give you a chance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you're right. Comparing that to music is a really good comparison, because there's plenty of songs that I would not have listened to,
Yeah.
that I listened to multiple times because I like the artist. And then on the third hearing of that song, I fell in love with it.
Right. Right.
They would have never got that chance if they hadn't already captured me very quickly
Mm-hmm.
with several albums already.
Right. Right. I know John Mayer said that, your first album, you need to impress them. And then the second ones and third ones, that's when you can start to experiment a little bit and have some fun. But like that first one, you really got to get people on your train.
Yes. And he did that, by the way. I still remember the
Room
first
for
time
Squares
I heard.
is a beautiful album.
Yes. I was in the car. I believe I was in college. Maybe not. But I was in the car driving from San Diego to Los Angeles,
Yeah.
and his song came on, and I thought, who is
this guy?
this?
Yeah. Yeah.
By the time I got home, my burning question was finding out more about John Mayer.
Well, and I know he gets a lot of flack, and there's some things he's done where he deserves it, but the amount of talent in that guy, and early on, he was very humble. Like he never. I was friends with someone who went to school with him, and she was like, he used to sit around and just play video games and just be like, kind of reserved a little bit, but his talent was evident from the start.
He's extraordinarily talented. I get the impression that he's a narcissist.
He turned into one. I don't know if he still is. I know playing with, the members of the Dead, like that's probably brought him back down to earth a little bit. But I know once the first or second album came out, he got a bit of a big head.
Yes. And a true narcissist is either a narcissist or they're not. You don't it's very difficult to not
To not
become
become one.
unbecome a narcissist.
Unbecome one, yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole brain
I feel like-
wiring thing. But
I feel like it would take something significant and massive to happen to you to change. It's like a rock bottom.
yes,
You know, something has to happen. And for many, that still doesn't change them. But hopefully it did with John Mayer.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I love his music.
It's
I
really
always
good.
will love his music.
I pulled him out a week or so ago and threw on a bunch of albums from his. And I was like, oh my God, I forgot how much I enjoyed this. You know, and the first album, again, it's just fun. But every album after that was just so artistically, just so much better than the other one.
I agree.
You know, so anyway, we got off on a little John Mayer tangent there. I don't mind, though. When writing, I'm kind of curious, what's your biggest struggle and how do you get past it?
What a great question. What is my biggest struggle? The first answer that pops into my head, and I don't know if that's correct, I'd really have to think about it, but the first immediate thing that comes to mind is the inner critic. Who are you to be writing this? This sucks. Oh, this is the worst thing that's ever been written. This is so boring. Why are you still writing? Why are you wasting your time? Your family needs you right now. You could be reading somebody else's work and improving something of quality. And you have the audacity to sit here and spend hours on this crap.
Who do you think you are?
Yes.
Yeah. That voice is, and I feel like every, not just writer, but every artist has that. You know, and maybe not every, but I think a majority of us are our own worst enemy, in a way.
It's hard. It's really hard to spend as much time as you need to spend on writing.
Especially by yourself writing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And telling other people around you, please don't talk to me for the next 5 hours.
Right.
While I sit here and spew crap. It's just
and grumble about it
yes.
the entire time.
Yes.
Yeah. There's two, when you said that, it made me think of two artists that I follow. One is actually an artist and the other is a comic artist. But Pascal Campion, he's actually, you can see his art up on my walls, that one and this one over here. Yeah. No, the one you're facing. Yep.
The cat.
The cat and the roses and everything.
Yes.
And maybe every day, maybe every other day on Instagram, he does something where he's got a cat. He calls it Kitty Cat. And it's this like late night thoughts, like series of images and things that he's thinking himself, but the cat, it's like he's having a conversation with himself and the voice is displayed as a cat.
I love that.
You know, I'm sure that helps him process all that imposter syndrome type thing, you know. And the other one I'm thinking of is a guy, his first name is Todd, and I cannot think of his name right now, but he does something called The Poet. And it's a 4-square comic, and there's like this old professor-looking poet and a pigeon. And the pigeon is very simple, straight to the point, and the poet is very flowery in language, you know, and it feels like he's having a conversation with himself.
Yes. You know, they say that the reason certain formulas work, you know, the hero's journey works over and over and over again is because we have these archetype characters and each of the characters represents a piece of us. So we relate to it when we see this concert of archetypes together working as we want them to be. You know, one, the straight person, the friend that's always loyal, the one that's always questioning. They're perfect representations of the voices in our head. And that's why we relate to them so much. How
does a fiction writer get past that? Do they put that in other characters, or
yes.
or what about memoir or nonfiction? Like, how do you overcome this feeling of I'm not good enough to tell this story?
In memoir, I think it's a lot harder.
Yeah,
because you're not filtering it through make believe.
Right.
It's often said that the truest stories are fiction.
Interesting.
And I think that's a valid concept.
Yeah.
I do think there are phenomenal memoirists out there who are able to pull off being true in memoir. But for the most part, it makes sense that the truest stories are fiction.
Yeah.
Because we can funnel all of our deepest, darkest stuff through an avatar.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I recently did a little radio show on KNSJ. It's the Electric Lunch, and it was a poetic thing, but it was more about just the host talking with writers about things, usually poets. But we were talking, and I know I've said this before, but I've sort of moved away from poetry back to fiction because I like ruining other people's lives. Like
Yes.
creating and breaking worlds that aren't mine, finally. So I can see what you're saying, whereas with fiction, I can take all the crap that's inside my head and just dump it onto someone else in a story.
Yes. All these little weird thoughts that you have, you can give to somebody else.
Right. Yeah, right. The things that I normally would just keep for my therapist, I can put in my fiction.
Yes, you give it to all these characters and they come alive.
Yeah, but really it's just us.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. I like that thought that, that fiction is a very good representation. It's like they say politicians are a representation of society, and our fiction is I guess in a way, a representation of the writer. As much as we may not want it to be, because I think there are times where look, I'm just telling a story that popped in my head. I'm not a 3-legged monster with 7 eyes. But sometimes I feel like that, I guess.
Right. And maybe, you're not literally that monster with the 3 eyes, but those thoughts and feelings,
I can put into
and
it.
They're coming from your head.
They are. Yeah. It's I guess why people interpret dreams.
Yes.
That's it's in my head. It must mean something.
It does.
Yeah.
It does mean something. And you could write about somebody who does something terrible and you've never done that terrible thing. But chances are their feelings about it, their thoughts about it, those are all you.
Yeah. Do you like the editing process?
I love the editing process.
Yeah. What do you like about it? Or what do you love about it?
I love it. So the writing is the hard part for me.
Really?
Getting it out there is hard. But once you've vomited all over the page, cleaning it up, again, maybe that's the anti-hoarder in me.
Yeah.
It's making sense of it all. It's organizing it. And the best, most exciting part is pulling things out, which I think most writers hate, is the cutting.
Yes. Yeah, the kill your darling stuff.
I love culling.
Yeah.
Because what you leave behind shines so much brighter if it's not cluttered by unnecessary things. So yeah, getting it out of me is the hard part.
See, I know I hear writers say this, and there are times where it's made me question if I actually am a writer, but or part of one of the things that makes me question if I'm a writer, but I don't like the editing process. And I know it's necessary and needed, and when I go through it at the end, I'm glad I went through it. But man, for me, it's like pulling teeth, I'm reapplying for grad school, and I had to give a 30-page sample of writing, and when I sent over a sample, I sent over 2 short stories, and the feedback was, next time, give us a portion of a novel. And I'm like, cool, I'm working on 2 different ones. I can get that for you. So I pulled out about 30 pages worth, and I was like, man, I wish I just had 4 more pages. So I added another chapter on to it, and I had 36 pages. And I'm like, well, I got to cut 6 pages. And I went through, and I spent the last 2 weeks cutting. And last night I finally got down to maybe 2 lines of extra space before I went to page 31, and I'm like, done, and I there are parts of it where I was like, I hate this. I hate making the decision on this paragraph, because as much as I like it, even though I know it's probably not moving the story along, I hated having to get rid of it.
And it's hard. I think it's really important to have somebody you trust to bounce ideas off of. And
yeah.
Jessica has been that person for me in most of my writing journey, because you don't want to cut something that adds the soul to your story.
Right.
It can be scary to cut the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Just because it's superfluous, sometimes that is the spice.
Yeah. Well, I can cut words. It's more like passages that are hard for me to cut. Are you the same, or you just all of it's the same as if you're cutting it and editing it, you like all of it? Like, cause I got an email from somebody who was like, here's something I saw of, if you're focused on word count, and with my short stories and submitting them, I am now.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a long list of words that you can cut out of your story and why you want to do it. And I went through those and I was like, oh my God, like most of these are in my story. You know?
Yes.
So those I can cut out, and I actually enjoy that.
Yes.
It's the bigger pieces. You know, if I'm reading and I read like half a page and I'm like, oh, what am I doing here? I love it, but what am I doing with it? That's harder for me to cut and clean.
I love all of it.
You love all of it.
All of it.
All of it, yeah.
You know, it's a good test is if you can have somebody, and this is very hard to find, but you get it at writers' conferences,
right.
is you have somebody else read your work to a room of people. This is the ideal, by the way. There's all sorts of ways to replicate this on a smaller scale.
Okay.
But the ideal is to have somebody reading your work to a group of people in a room, and you sit there, and the moment you feel in your mind, oh, hurry up, you know, this is the boring part, just get to the third paragraph, and then they're going to get hooked, and you can see the room shift and almost relax, like, oh, now we're at something interesting and I'm excited and I can get into this story. That's all stuff you needed to cut.
I love that thought. I never thought to do that.
And you could do the same thing on a smaller scale, maybe reading to, for me, it would be my mother, because my mother loves me, but, you know, she's not like, oh, everything my daughter writes is great. My mother is very much get to the good part.
Yeah.
And so whenever I feel myself rushing to get to the part where I'm going to get her interest, I know all that stuff needs to be cut.
Needs to go, yeah.
And I need to figure out a way to backfill in just the little pieces of gold that are needed to understand the good stuff.
Are you ever tempted to put that stuff in later?
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's another great saying with writing: for every scene, come in late, leave early.
Yeah. Okay. I like that.
It's that same concept of when you're in a room and you're reading aloud, or somebody's reading your work aloud, and you want to get to the good stuff. Start at the good stuff. Yeah. And then figure out how much you need of that backfilling stuff in order for the reader to understand it.
See, I think that's really good advice, and I guess I never looked at it at that experiment that way. I'm gonna have to do that now. So I'm gonna get a group of people to sit in my apartment. I'm just gonna sit and stare at them while they read my story.
It's painful.
I can't imagine. I've talked with others about being in the same room while other people are reading and analyzing their writing. Like I've only been in a room once. I may have told the story before, but I was trying to get, you know, Greg Proops, the comedian.
No.
You ever watch Whose Line Is It Anyway?
I've heard of it.
Okay. There was a comedian on there. He's got red curly hair, these Buddy Holly glasses, and he's hilarious and extremely smart. And he loves poetry. So for a while, I was trying to get him my book so he could read it. Mm-hmm. And it just kept, his P.O. box was having issues, so it kept getting sent back. Finally, he did a show here in San Diego, and I went to the show, and I hand-delivered it to him. I said, hey, my name's Adam Greenfield. I've been trying to send this to you. And he was immediately like, oh, I'm so glad you brought this. I've been wondering where it is. I don't know what's happening. I've got other people who are complaining about my P.O. box, but I'm glad you brought it. And I sat there, and part of his live sets is actually opening up gifts that fans get him. Mm-hmm. So he pulls my book out of the envelope, and he reads a poem from it. And I was like, I kind of shrunk in my seat. I was like, this is weird. Like, I didn't know what to do, you know? And as he's reading it, it was just super interesting to see to hear how he read it and interpreted it as he was reading it. And it felt weird. But I can't imagine someone doing that with my fiction, because my fiction is where my love is.
Mm-hmm. It's so powerful to have it done. If you can have a friend read to you, you'll find yourself, hurry up.
Just get to that point.
Skip that. And then the part where you get excited, that's the good stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Cut as much of that other stuff as you can.
I've been in a writer's group where we sat down and we read it as we were in there, like for the first time. And I sat and I watched. I would just go back and forth between the 3 or 4 people and just looking at them, just waiting for like facial expressions, you know, and wishing I could be like, where you at? Mm-hmm. You know, like what part of the story or poem are you at? So I know.
So that's why you want them reading it out loud.
That's more out loud, yeah.
You gather
Noted.
a lot more data that way.
Oh, that's such a fun way of doing it. I'll have to remember that. So maybe an impossible, definitely a weird question to answer, but why not? What's a direction you'd like to see the world of writing go?
Ooh. I would love to see writing take the forefront again, that the books that people were buying in my ideal fantasy world, that it's not Britney Spears and Snooki and that it's not the influencers, that it is the writers.
Yeah.
I would love to get back to a place where readers are reading books written by writers.
Even though you're a big fan of memoir, you still want it to be written.
Oh, the memoir that I love is not at all celebrity memoir. It is Cheryl Strayed. It is the Liars Club. Mary Carr. It's the actual writers who write their stories.
Okay.
100%. To me, they should be in completely different categories.
Why do you think it's too focused? Oh,
I'm sorry I got so excited. I just pulled out a book I'm reading right now. I just discovered this writer, Melissa Broder, who I love.
Yeah.
So I'm reading her memoir, Milk Fed, and it's fascinating.
And is she a writer?
She's a writer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. What do you think? Do you think that's just the world we live in, that people want to read more Britney Spears than a writer, or do you think
seems that way?
Yeah.
I mean, that's where the money is going. I mean, she's getting Britney Spears. She's a extreme example, but Britney Spears, Prince Harry, these are the ones getting the $10 million advances, and the books are selling out.
We already know their story, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't read much celebrity memoir. I don't think I've ever had any interest in celebrities that aren't musicians and writers. Like, those are the two that I don't need a TV star, or, I know Britney Spears is a musician. I get it. But we've lived with her for so long. Like, I feel like, do I need to hear about her conservatorship?
And I love hearing information about her conservatorship. I actually find that, as a feminist, fascinating on a lot of levels. But she's not a writer. I like watching documentaries.
How do you feel about ghostwriters?
I feel very grateful that they exist. Gosh. The gentleman who wrote The Tender Bar, he also wrote Prince Harry's book.
Okay.
He's a great example.
Okay.
The Tender Bar is incredible. That's his story. It is so beautiful and so moving and so fascinating.
Yeah. And
then I got through as much of the Prince Harry book as I could, and I only read it because he wrote it. Moringer, J.R. Moringer, I think is his name, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It doesn't have the same feel to it.
It's because it's not his story.
It's not his story. Yeah. It's not as artistic. It's not as beautiful. It doesn't feel the same. It doesn't give me the same feels.
Well, I had Jim Ruland on here, and I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a San Diego writer, but he's very well known outside of San Diego, and he's ghost written stories or memoirs. So this guy, Jim Ruland, he was saying that he spent years with these people before he even wrote a word. And in doing so, he was able to make it so it was their story. And he was telling it as they would, as opposed to he was telling it as he would. And I don't know if maybe this person didn't spend as much time with Prince William. Who knows? Like, I don't know if that's a big part of it, or maybe he did, and it just didn't work out because it wasn't his story.
Even if he did spend time with him, it doesn't mean that the person that they are writing on behalf of is going to be as truly vulnerable as a writer will be. When we write our own story, we are digging deep into our truth. If we are extremely talented memoirist, we're going deeper than most people will ever go with themselves.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And you can't do that on behalf of somebody else.
You're not inside them. Well, you shouldn't be inside.
You can't force somebody else to dig down to the deepest, truest thing.
Right.
They can tell their stories and their point of view, but writing a memoir as a memoirist is not just about the story you're sharing. It is that digging down into the universal truths, which are at the core of everything. J.R. Moringer, if I'm pronouncing his name right, who also did Prince Harry, he also wrote a book he ghost wrote for Andre Agassi, who was very forthcoming with a lot of things. And that was actually a fascinating memoir to read.
So it can be done.
It can be done, but it still doesn't feel the same to me. It's not the same as when he was digging into his own truth.
Yeah.
When this happened, this is the very core of how it affected me.
Do you think if it was left up to the person that the book would then possibly just not get written?
Yes, and that's why I'm grateful that ghostwriters exist.
Gotcha.
And I have many friends who are ghostwriters, and they're doing a great service.
Yeah.
And it is important to preserve other people's stories.
Yeah.
And Prince Harry, what is it really like to feel like to be a prince? That's a very esoteric experience. And it is nice that we have that on our bookshelves to see what it's like to live in that world from his perspective and from Andre Agassi's perspective.
Right.
They have value. It's just a different experience than reading a memoir written by the memoirist.
Do you think as a publisher and an avid reader that you may see it, and again, this is not a gotcha question or anything like that or putting you on the defensive mode, but because you have so much time editing, writing, doing things like that, you might see it a little different than other people who were enamored with the Prince Harry book?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yes.
It has an influence on you, doesn't it?
Yes. When I read books, I'm not just reading a book. I'm
mentally
editing it, not changing it and critiquing it, but understanding it. I'm tearing it apart, analyzing it.
Are you able to read for pleasure?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It makes it more pleasurable to me.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I was worried about that. As I got more and more into understanding plots and really deep diving into writing, would it ruin the experience for me?
Yeah.
We always joke about marrying a gynecologist, but, no, it makes it actually far more pleasurable for me.
Right.
I'm getting more out of it.
Okay. Curious. I am assuming your husband is not a gynecologist?
No, he is not.
Okay. All right. I don't know why I thought to ask, but it just popped in my head. I guess I might as well, right? All right. So we'll wrap up here. We got, not with that question, but a different one. And I ask this question every time. If there was one book, story, anything creative you wish you wrote or even published, what would it be?
Oh my God. Every time I'm reading something, I wish I was the one that wrote it. It happens on the daily.
Does it? Okay.
Oh yeah. My daughter was watching the Percy Jackson movie last night. Oh, I wish I had written that.
Yeah.
Because if I had, then I could sit around and spend all of my time writing instead of having to do anything in the business world in order to support myself. If in the perfect world, all I would do is write. So I wish I wrote many, many, many great books that made lots of money so that I could write all the time.
You could write all the time. So it's not so much a specific story as it is just writing in general.
It's both. I mean, there's writers like Cheryl Strayed or Joan Didion, my favorites. Oh my gosh. Sometimes when I read something by a writer of that caliber, I never want to write again. I have a moment where they are so good that
how could I?
How could I possibly put anything out in the world when it will never be like this? And so those are books that I wish that I wrote because, oh my God, to have that kind of writer genius inside of me would be incredible. But then there's the other books that are just commercially successful. And if you had written that book, then it would give you the financial security to spend your days writing.
I had a friend many years ago, say, just write a vampire book, make your money, and then write what you want. And I'm like, I don't write vampire stories. Like, that's not who I am. I get the idea behind it, but I don't know if I could just, now that I think about it, just to get to the point where I could write all day and that was my job, I would try. I would try to write something that was commercially viable just to get it out there so I could focus more on it and I didn't have to work certain jobs or do the business end of my podcasting work or, all those things. So I guess that makes sense. I just don't know if I could do it or not.
I've done it.
Yeah.
It's hard because it takes a long time to write something. And then by the time you finish it, edit it, publish it, the trend could change.
Yeah.
But murder mysteries are extremely popular. And so I wrote a murder mystery to see if it would sell better than a previous book I'd written in a genre that wasn't as easy to sell. And it absolutely worked.
Yeah. Okay.
When I go to writers' festivals, I'll sell the whole box of that murder mystery
Right.
before I start digging into a genre that's less popular. So you can do it, and it does work.
Mm-hmm. Why not?
Yeah.
Okay.
It didn't feel as rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the same experience.
Do you think it has to be entirely rewarding, or can it be partially rewarding and just part of the job as well?
It depends what your goal is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, really quick before we wrap up, you said Cheryl Strayed. She's the one that the hiker.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
They made a movie with
Reese Witherspoon.
Reese Witherspoon. I wanted to say Alicia Silverstone, but I always get those two mixed up. Reese Witherspoon. That was
Wild.
a hell of a story.
Oh my god.
No.
It's not just that the story; it was the writing.
It was the writing,
which is so lovely because usually what sells books is the story.
Mm-hmm.
But with Wild, that, in my opinion, was very much the writing.
She was here 5 years ago, wasn't she, at a writers' festival?
She's
couple years ago.
Always doing things, but it's very, very expensive.
Yeah. I remember her being here for I think the San Diego Writers Festival or something like that a few years ago, and she was at the library and did some things there. But do you think that a story like that is needed to be commercially successful? Because that is a very what's the word I want to use? I hate to use the word unique because I think that's overused, but that is a very unique story of
the fact that she told it while hiking the Pacific Crest Trail.
Yeah.
It definitely helped. I mean, you have to have somewhat interesting story for a book to sell, and it did. It's a great concept.
Right.
But I believe that it was the quality of the writing.
Yeah.
At least it was for me.
Okay.
I mean, I'm biased, so
Yeah.
But all the people I know who love that book, it's all
mention
just
the writing.
her sentences. Oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
wish I could write like her.
There was another writer that wrote, and I always forget his name. A million little things.
Oh, James Fry, A Million Little Pieces.
A million little pieces. Right. Yeah. I whatever you want to think about him, is a separate thing. But I liked that format of that book and how he wrote it.
You like the present tense, very fast paced.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that had me hooked.
It's a really intense style. That book stressed me out.
It did, but for me it stressed me out in a good way because it stressed me out as a it was like a good stress. Like it just kept dragging me along, as much as I was like, oh, this is so hard, like teeth falling out, like, but I was like, I just want to keep reading. Yeah. But I think it was the way it was structured. I'm curious if it was placed in, I guess, the more standard format of writing, like if it would have been different, if it had quotation marks or
if it was in past tense
or past tense. Yeah. I'm curious if that would have had the same impact.
I think he's very talented.
Yeah.
You can argue about the morals of what happened with that story, but that would not have been what it was if he wasn't such a great writer.
Exactly. Yeah. I agree.
And he created a story that was absolutely fascinating.
I think that would be, if I had to answer my own question, that might be up there as one of the stories I wish I wrote. Again, we can have another discussion about the morals of how that was presented to the world.
That would be a fascinating podcast all on its own. Would you have written that story and taken the firestorm that he had to take in order to get that book out there? And he's still writing and he has a great career.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he pissed off Oprah, but, who doesn't, I guess, sometimes.
And I think she got over it. Didn't she have him back and
I
they
think
kind
they
of
did.
made up?
Yeah, I think they did. But, I mean, I get the ire towards him about it. At the same time, I thought it was an interesting experiment.
Yes. And honestly, I felt that in the smallest version of it with my memoir when I was shopping it. Okay,
Mhm.
we'll just change this. We'll just change this. We'll just change this. Well, pretty soon it's not true.
It's not true, right? Yeah.
I could see how easily that would happen. And if I had really big publishing houses offering me really big money, I mean, I could see where he was tempted to make a name for himself as a writer. It is so hard when you don't have a platform, when you're not a celebrity, to get not only to get published by the Big Five, but to be one of their top ranking books where they're actually putting, they have a whole tier system.
Yeah.
And they put him at the top of it. That's a tempting situation.
It is. And I don't know if anybody could answer what they do unless they were in that situation.
Yes. I have no judgment.
No. I don't know what I would do. I would hope that I was like, no, I got to tell the story, that it's the actual story. But at the same time, like there's a...
You don't know. You don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know all the details.
No, we don't. It's life.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to end, right?
Yes.
Right. Well, Holly, I'm glad we did this. This was a really fun conversation, and I'm glad you were here to do it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.